The galaxy had grown cold, not because of distance or time, but because hearts had forgotten warmth. Among the 1,000 alien worlds ruled by the Galactic Council, life had become nothing more than numbers, trade, and control. Every life had a price, even the innocent ones. On the planet Veora, a decree was announced through glowing screens and echoing speakers. The Council's message was clear. All unclaimed orphans must be sold to the state markets. Labor must not go to waste. Those words spread like poison across the colonies. No one dared to question them. No one, except one human. In the dusty streets of Veora's trade quarter, Ethan Cole, a single father and former engineer, stood still as the message repeated. His hands were rough from years of repair work, his clothes patched and worn. But his heart was stronger than any machine he'd ever built. He had lost his wife and little daughter in a border conflict years ago. Since then, he lived quietly, fixing broken tools, avoiding trouble, surviving one day at a time. Until that day. He heard the cries before he saw them, tiny voices from a fenced yard near the auction square. Behind metal bars, dozens of children, some human, most alien, sat trembling. Their skin glowed faintly in the pale sunlight, colors of blue, silver, and green. Many were too young to even understand why they were there. Each child wore a tag with a number and a price. A guard, tall and armored, barked orders to buyers. No touching. You pay, you own. His voice echoed off the walls, cold and cruel. Ethan felt his breath tighten. He wanted to look away, but he couldn't. One child, a small girl with soft gray skin and bright amber eyes, looked up at him. She didn't speak, but her gaze said everything. She was scared, hungry, and alone. Ethan's heart broke. In that one moment, memories rushed back. His daughter's laughter, her tiny hands reaching for him, her voice saying, "Don't leave me, Daddy." He stepped closer to the fence. The guard turned, snarling. "Step back, human." No buying before auction. Ethan didn't move. "They're children," he said quietly, his voice trembling with anger. "Not tools. Not property." The guard laughed, showing sharp teeth. "Everything has value. Even pity." Ethan's fist clenched. The alien crowd passing by barely noticed. They were used to such cruelty. It was normal to them. But Ethan felt something deep inside him awaken. He had seen too much pain, too much loss. He couldn't let this happen again. As the crowd dispersed, Ethan stayed hidden in the shadows, watching the children. The little gray girl reached through the bars, her fingers brushing the air. She whispered something in her native tongue. Ethan didn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. She was begging for help. That night, the city lights dimmed as the curfew alarms rang out. Traders locked their doors, guards patrolled the streets, and silence filled the air. But Ethan didn't sleep. He sat at his workbench, staring at the tools before him. Cutters, wrenches, plasma blades. His heart pounded as his mind battled between fear and duty. He remembered his daughter again, the day she was taken by soldiers, and how powerless he had felt. He had sworn that if he ever had a chance to stop something like that again, he would. And now that chance was here. Ethan rose from his chair. The decision burned inside him like a star coming to life. He packed his tools into a small bag, wrapped himself in a dark cloak, and stepped out into the night. The wind was cold, sharp, and full of dust. As he neared the holding cages, he saw the guards asleep near their posts, believing no one would dare break the council's law. Ethan looked at the frightened faces through the bars. "You're going home tonight," he whispered softly. For the first time in years, his voice carried hope. Somewhere deep within that cruel world, something began to shift. Small, silent, but powerful. The human single father, who had already lost everything, was about to defy an empire built on fear. The galaxy would soon remember what humanity truly meant. The night was silent, except for the distant hum of air drones patrolling above the city. The stars looked dim behind the smog that covered Veora's skies, but beneath that darkness one man moved with quiet purpose. Ethan Cole, human father and widower, walked the narrow alleys with his tool bag clutched tight. His heart beat fast, but his steps were steady. He reached the old market yard where the orphan cages were kept. Faint lights flickered from rusted lamps, and shadows stretched like ghosts across the ground. Inside the cages, the children slept in piles, trying to stay warm. The small alien girl with amber eyes was awake, staring at the sky. She turned her head when she saw Ethan approach. "Shh," he whispered, pressing a finger to his lips. "I'm here to help." The girl didn't understand his words, but she seemed to trust the kindness in his voice. She nodded slowly. Ethan crouched beside the metal lock. He pulled out his plasma cutter, its faint blue light reflecting off his tired face. "Almost there," he murmured, cutting through the first chain. Sparks flew, small but sharp. Every sound made his heart jump. He couldn't afford to wake the guards. He freed the first cage, then the second. The children stirred, their wide eyes full of confusion and hope. A few began to cry quietly, scared of what might happen next. Ethan leaned closer, whispering, "Stay quiet, little ones. I'll get you all out." A sudden noise froze him, a metallic clang from the far side of the yard. He ducked behind a crate. 2 guards walked by, their armor glowing faintly under the lamps. "Did you hear that?" one asked. "Probably a rat," the other grumbled, yawning. "No one's stupid enough to break council law." They moved on. Ethan waited until their voices faded, then returned to the cages. He worked faster now. His fingers trembled, not from fear but from urgency. He knew time was slipping away. By the time the first hint of dawn touched the horizon, most of the children were free. He motioned for them to follow him, leading them toward the drainage tunnel he had found earlier. As they crawled through, the small, gray-skinned girl tugged his sleeve and whispered in broken words, "You, take us home." Ethan paused. For a moment he didn't know what to say. He wasn't sure he could give them a home. But then he looked at their faces, tired, hungry, afraid, and something inside him solidified. "Yes," he said softly, "I'll take you home." The girl smiled for the first time, but their escape didn't go unnoticed for long. One of the guards returned early, finding empty cages and broken locks. The alarm blared across the square, red lights flashing like blood in the mist. Ethan turned to the children. "Run," he shouted.
"Don't stop!"
They scattered through the tunnels as footsteps thundered behind them. Bolts of plasma fire lit the air, striking walls and metal beams. Ethan stayed behind, trying to hold off the guards. He grabbed a fallen pipe and swung hard, knocking one soldier down. Another aimed his weapon. Ethan ducked, rolled, and hit again. He wasn't a soldier anymore, but the fire in his heart made him stronger than fear. He fought not to win, but to protect. When the last child disappeared into the forest beyond the tunnel, Ethan collapsed against the wall, gasping. He could hear the guards shouting orders behind him. He knew he couldn't outrun them, but he didn't care. The children were free. Before they caught him, he whispered to himself, "For her, and for them." Then he turned to face the soldiers, standing tall despite his wounds. "You can take me," he said, voice steady, "but you'll never touch them again." The guards hesitated. For the first time, they saw not a weak human, but something far greater. The man who refused to look away. As the soldiers dragged him away in chains, the first sun rose over Veora, and far in the distance, a group of small orphans looked back toward the city, whispering the word they barely knew, human. That morning, across the galaxy, a story began to spread about a man who stood against the law to protect the helpless. A single father who had nothing left to lose but his soul, and yet chose to give it for others. The galaxy didn't know it yet, but the age of silent cruelty was ending, because one human had refused to look away. The sun had not fully risen when chaos swept through the streets of Veora. Sirens wailed across the district, echoing off metal towers. Loudspeakers blared warnings about a human fugitive who had freed alien children. The Galactic Council called him a danger to order. To most people, he was just a name whispered with fear. But to the children who had escaped the cages, he was their savior. Ethan Cole lay hidden in the ruins of an old cargo yard at the edge of the city. His body ached, his arms burned with cuts, and his breath came in heavy gasps. Yet his mind was clear. He had no regret. The images of the freed children running under the pale dawn gave him strength. Beside him, the small gray-skinned girl, whom he now called Mira, peeked out from a broken wall. Her eyes reflected both worry and trust. "They find us?" she asked in her trembling voice. Ethan smiled faintly. "Not if we keep moving," he said, adjusting his worn jacket. "We just need to reach the forests. The scanners can't track heat there." She nodded, clutching his sleeve tightly as they slipped through narrow alleys, Behind them, patrol drones buzzed through the skies, scanning for signs of life. Ethan moved with quiet steps, guiding Mira and a few of the other children who had stayed close. Every sound, every shadow felt dangerous. As they reached the city's edge, a mechanical voice thundered behind them. "Stop! Human fugitive detected." Ethan turned just in time to see armored guards emerging from the mist. Plasma rifles glowed blue. He shoved the children behind a broken vehicle. "Stay down," he shouted. The guards fired. Bolts of energy hit the metal walls, sending sparks flying. Ethan dove to the side, rolling over dirt and debris. He grabbed a rusted tool from his belt, a plasma cutter, and flicked it on. The sharp beam of light hissed in his hand. It wasn't a weapon, but it was all he had. He faced the first guard head-on, dodging a blast, and swung his cutter against the soldier's chest plate. Sparks exploded as metal cracked. The guard fell back, stunned. Ethan charged forward, tackling the second one to the ground. He was outnumbered, outmatched, but he refused to back down. "Run!" he yelled to the children. "Get to the forest! Go!" They ran through the fog, small figures disappearing between the wrecked buildings. Mira turned once, tears streaming down her face. "Come with us," she screamed. Ethan smiled through the pain. "I'll be right behind you." But deep down, he knew he wouldn't make it. Another guard struck him from behind. The plasma rifle fired, grazing his shoulder. He fell to his knees, the pain sharp and searing. The soldiers surrounded him, weapons raised. "Why do this, human?" one sneered. "You think saving a few orphans will change anything? You're nothing." Ethan looked up, eyes blazing. "Maybe I am nothing, but they're everything." He stood again, defiant. "And I won't let your kind treat them like machines." The leader of the guards stepped closer, fury twisting his face. "You broke the council's decree. You'll die for this." Ethan grinned weakly. "Then I'll die free." Before they could react, he hurled his plasma cutter at the nearby control panel. The explosion tore through the gate beside them, collapsing metal beams and blocking the path. The blast threw everyone backward, covering the area in smoke and dust. When the light faded, Ethan was gone. Only broken chains and a trail of footprints remained. Hours later, the children reached the forest edge, panting and shaking. Mira looked back toward the city, her small voice whispering, "He'll come." He promised. The others said nothing, but their eyes filled with tears. As night fell, rumors began spreading across the colonies. They said a human slave breaker had destroyed a council auction yard. Some called him a rebel. Some said he was already dead. But others, especially the orphans, believed he was still out there hiding among the stars, waiting for the right time to strike again. That night, beneath the silent trees, Mira whispered into the darkness, "Thank you, Father." The words carried into the wind far beyond the forest, far beyond the world of Veora, and somewhere in the shadows a wounded man smiled through the pain, whispering back, "You're safe now." He knew the war had just begun, but he also knew one truth that no law could erase. A human heart could break chains, no weapon ever could. The story of the human who broke the orphan cages spread faster than any ship could travel. Across space stations, colonies, and distant moons, whispers carried his name, Ethan Cole. Some called him a terrorist, others called him a saint. The Galactic Council called him a problem that must be erased. The hunt began before the blood from the battlefield had even dried. Posters of his face appeared on holoscreens across the cities. Wanted, human traitor, dangerous, reward, 10,000 credits. The image showed his tired eyes and scarred cheek, a man who looked more like a mechanic than a rebel. But to the Council, he was a symbol of defiance. High above Veora, a cruiser called the Sentinel's Wrath hovered in orbit. On its bridge stood Commander Vexar, a tall alien with deep red skin and gold armor. His voice was sharp like glass. "He humiliated our laws," Vexar said to his officers. "He made fools of our guards. Find him. I want the human's head before the next rotation." The soldiers saluted, fear in their eyes. Everyone knew what failure meant under Vexar's command. Far below, Ethan and the children were hiding in the ruins of an old mining colony, half buried under rock and vines. The place had been abandoned for decades, but it offered shelter and safety. Broken machines stood like metal skeletons, and rain leaked through the cracked ceilings. Ethan's wound from the plasma burn still hurt, but he didn't stop. Every day he built small shelters, cooked what little food they could find, and told stories to keep the children calm. Mira, the small gray girl, often sat beside him. "They're looking for you," she whispered one night as the wind howled through the ruins. "I know," Ethan replied quietly, tightening the bandage on his shoulder. "You could leave us. Hide somewhere safe." He smiled faintly. "Safe doesn't exist anymore, Mira. But together, we can make something better." The girl nodded slowly, understanding more than her years allowed. The next morning, the sound of engines shook the ground. Ethan froze. "Get down," he whispered. The children huddled together as shadows passed over the ruins. Patrol ships were sweeping the area, scanning for heat signatures. He motioned for the children to crawl into a collapsed tunnel. "Stay there. No sound, no light." As they hid, Ethan climbed to the surface, crawling behind wrecked walls. Through his scope, he saw armored soldiers landing from the dropship, council hunters. They were closing in fast. Ethan knew he couldn't outrun them. So he did what a father would do. He became the distraction. He grabbed a broken plasma torch, overcharged it, and tossed it into a pile of metal crates. The explosion shook the valley, sending up a cloud of smoke. The soldiers turned immediately toward the noise. "There!" one shouted. Ethan ran in the opposite direction, his boots splashing through puddles of mud and ash. Blaster fire followed, slicing through the air. One shot grazed his arm, another burned past his leg. Still, he kept moving. He reached the cliffs at the edge of the mining zone, the ground dropping into darkness. He could hear the soldiers behind him closing in. "Ethan Cole." Commander Vexar's amplified voice echoed from the ship above. "You can't hide. Surrender now, and your death will be quick." Ethan looked up at the glowing sky, his body trembling, but his spirit unbroken. "You'll have to do better than that," he muttered. He jumped from the cliff. The soldiers gasped until they realized he had fallen into the river below. The scanners lost his signal in the current. Hours later, drenched and bruised, Ethan pulled himself onto the riverbank miles downstream. He lay on his back staring at the stars above, the same stars his daughter once loved. He whispered softly, "Still here." Back in the ruins, Mira and the others waited all night, praying he would return. When he finally stumbled through the tunnel entrance at dawn, weak but alive, the children ran to him. Mira threw her arms around him, crying, "You came back." He smiled through the pain. "Told you I would." The hunt would only grow more dangerous now. The council would not stop until he was gone. But as Ethan looked at the children, his new family, he made a silent vow. They could hunt him forever, but they would never touch the hope he had built. And so began the legend whispered in secret places, the story of the human father who defied an empire. The galaxy had started a hunt for one man, but what they truly unleashed was a revolution. The rain had not stopped for days. It fell like endless tears upon the shattered world of Veora. Beneath the ruins of the old mining colony, Ethan Cole sat quietly by the dim light of a flickering lantern. The children slept around him, wrapped in worn blankets and soft whispers. Their breathing was calm, safe for now, but Ethan knew peace never lasted long, not in this galaxy. He pressed a hand to his injured shoulder, feeling the burn beneath the bandages. The wound was healing slowly, but the pain reminded him he was still alive. In the silence, he could hear his own thoughts whispering, "How long can I keep them safe?" He looked at Mira, the gray-skinned girl curled beside two younger orphans. She had grown stronger, more confident, but the fear in her eyes never left completely. When she had first called him father, something inside him broke and healed at the same time. He wasn't sure he deserved that word, yet he knew he would die before letting anyone take it away. Far above the ruins, the Galactic Council's forces grew restless. Commander Vexar had failed to capture Ethan, and that failure burned like acid on his pride. On board the Sentinel's Wrath, he stood before a giant holographic map, tracing the river paths with a clawed finger. "The human cannot have gone far," he hissed. "Deploy the Seekers. Burn every hiding place. I want his screams broadcast to every colony as a warning." "Yes, Commander," the soldiers replied. The hunt tightened. Dozens of scout drones descended toward the surface, scanning forests, tunnels, and old ruins. Their sensors picked up heat signatures, faint but clustered. The system identified them. Group of 12 unidentified life forms. Presence of human confirmed. By the time Ethan noticed the faint hum in the sky, it was too late. A crimson light flashed across the walls of their hideout. "Drones!" he shouted. "Everyone move." Panic spread. The children ran toward the tunnels as explosions shook the ground. Dust and debris rained down. Ethan grabbed Mira's hand and pushed her ahead. "Keep them together!" "Don't look back." He turned to face the entrance, picking up his plasma cutter. The first drone entered, scanning the room. Its red lens locked on him. "Target confirmed." Ethan fired the cutter, slicing through the air. The beam struck the drone's core and it burst into flames. But more came, 3, then 5, then 10. He ducked behind fallen rocks as energy bolts flew past his head. The air smelled of ozone and burning metal. He fought like a storm, wild, desperate, fearless. But for every drone he destroyed, more appeared. The children's cries echoed from the tunnels. Then a blast hit the ceiling above. Rocks collapsed, blocking the exit. Dust filled the air. Ethan coughed, his lungs burning. He could barely see. He crawled toward the rubble, pushing aside stones with trembling hands. "Mira," he called out. "Are you there?" A faint voice answered from behind the wall. "We're okay. The others are safe." Relief washed over him, but it didn't last. Through the smoke, he saw the shape of a large figure stepping into the chamber. Commander Vexar himself. His golden armor shimmered in the firelight. "So this is the famous human," Vexar sneered. "The lawbreaker. The father of orphans." Ethan rose slowly, gripping a broken piece of metal like a blade. "If you've come for me, leave the children." "They've done nothing," Vexar smiled cruelly. "Everything in this world belongs to the Council, even mercy." He raised his blaster, aiming it at Ethan's chest. For a moment, time stopped. Ethan thought of his daughter, of Mira, of every small hand he had held since that night in the cages. He had nothing left to give except his life, and he was ready. He stepped forward, unafraid. If dying means they live free, then shoot. The commander hesitated, not out of pity but confusion. He had never seen anyone face death without fear. That hesitation cost him. Ethan swung the metal shard, striking the weapon aside. The shot missed, hitting the ceiling instead. The explosion threw both men backward. Vexar fell unconscious under the debris. Ethan struggled to his feet, coughing blood. He limped to the blocked tunnel and began clearing stones one by one. "Go," he whispered through the gap. "Run as far as you can." Mira's teary face appeared for a moment. "Come with us," he smiled weakly. "Not this time." As the soldiers closed in, Ethan sat down against the wall, his strength fading. "They'll never stop you now," he murmured. He looked toward the light breaking through the smoke and whispered his last prayer. "Let them live." When the soldiers found him minutes later, he was barely breathing, but smiling. Around him lay the wreckage of their own machines, melted and broken. The human father had given everything, and in doing so, he had won something no empire could steal, the hearts of a generation who would never forget him. The whole galaxy held its breath. From the highest towers of the Council to the slums of forgotten moons, every holoscreen showed the same image, a human man in chains. His name Ethan Cole, his crime saving orphans from being sold like cargo. The trial was held inside the Hall of Judgment, a vast circular chamber made of silver stone and cold light. The air smelled of metal and fear. Ethan stood at the center, wrists bound, blood dried on his torn shirt. Around him sat the Council, 12 alien rulers from 12 powerful species, all looking down on him as if he were something less than alive. The presiding judge, Chancellor Arvane, spoke first. Her voice echoed like thunder. "Ethan Cole of Earth," she declared, "you have violated galactic law. You destroyed Council property, attacked guards, and aided the escape of illegal orphans. Do you deny these charges?" Ethan looked up. His eyes were tired but steady. "No," he said simply. "I did all of that." A murmur swept through the audience. The aliens watching couldn't understand it. No one ever admitted guilt to the council. Arvain's eyes narrowed. "Then you accept your punishment?" Ethan's voice was calm. "If saving children is a crime, then yes. But you should know, those laws aren't justice. They're chains." The chamber fell silent. The Chancellor's expression hardened. "You speak of justice? You, a human who broke our peace." "Your peace," Ethan said softly, "was built on suffering." The audience gasped. Even the guards shifted uneasily. No one had ever spoken to the council like that. Outside, across the colonies, people gathered in marketplaces and homes to watch the live feed. On the desert planet of Ralka, miners stopped working to listen. On a floating city above the gas clouds of Thren, alien children stared at the screen with wide eyes. And in a small cave far away, Mira and the rescued orphans huddled around a flickering hologram. The moment they saw Ethan's face, Mira whispered, "He's alive." Back in the hall, the Chancellor slammed her staff against the floor. "Enough. You have defied the Council, cost us soldiers, and endangered peace between species. You will be sentenced to death by orbital fire." Ethan didn't flinch. "If that's what it takes to wake this galaxy up, then so be it." A roar of voices filled the hall, anger, shock, disbelief. The guards moved closer, ready to drag him away. But just then, the chamber doors opened with a hiss. A small voice cried out, "Wait!" Everyone turned. Mira stood there, trembling, holding the hand of another orphan beside her. Behind them, more children entered, dozens of them, all from the cages Ethan had freed. The crowd gasped. No one knew how they had crossed security. The Chancellor shouted, "Who let them in?" Mira stepped forward, her small feet echoing on the marble floor. "We came ourselves," she said in broken words. He saved us." A ripple of whispers spread through the audience. The children surrounded Ethan, forming a silent circle. One by one, they looked up at the council, their eyes full of courage. Mira pointed at Ethan. "He is our father." The entire chamber froze. Even the Chancellor couldn't speak. Cameras captured the moment. The tiny alien girl standing beside the chained human, her voice breaking through 1,000 years of cruelty. Then something began to change. Among the crowd, an alien worker stood up and clapped. Another joined, then another. Soon the hall was filled with the sound of applause, soft at first, then thunderous. The council had never seen such defiance. Arvain slammed her staff again. Silence. But her voice was lost beneath the growing chant that echoed through the hall. "Free the human! Free the human!" By nightfall, the story had spread across every system. Billions watched the replay. The moment a child called a human her father, and the galaxy remembered what love looked like. Under that pressure, the council could not carry out the sentence. The trial ended not in death, but in something far more powerful: change. Ethan was released under guard, his chains removed. He didn't smile, but his eyes glistened when he saw Mira run to him. As the two embraced, a news voice broadcasted across the galaxy. The trial that was meant to break him has instead broken the silence of 1,000 worlds. And in that silence, a spark of hope began to burn, one that no empire could ever extinguish. Years passed, yet the story of Ethan Cole refused to fade. What began as a single act of defiance became a spark that lit countless worlds. The galaxy that once called him a criminal now spoke his name in whispers of respect, the human father. After the trial, Ethan had been released, but not truly free. The council feared his influence, so they sent him into exile, banished to the quiet moon of avarice far from trade routes and colonies. There were no cities there, only plains of white dust and soft blue skies. To the council it was punishment. To Ethan it was peace. He built a small home by the cliffs overlooking the glowing seas. His days were simple, gathering water, growing food, fixing old machines that washed up from the wrecks of forgotten ships. But every evening as the twin suns set, he stood outside, watching the horizon, knowing that somewhere out there, the children he saved were growing. On the anniversary of his trial, something extraordinary happened. A ship appeared in the sky, its engines humming softly. Ethan shielded his eyes as it descended. The door opened, and there stood Mira, taller now, her gray skin faintly silver under the sunlight. She was no longer a scared orphan. She was strong, graceful, and filled with quiet pride. She ran to him, tears in her eyes. "You waited," she said, her voice trembling. He smiled faintly. "I promised I would." Behind her came others, the children he had freed. They were no longer children, but young men and women from different species, united not by blood but by choice. They knelt before him, not as followers, but as family. Mira stepped forward, placing a small silver medallion in his hand. It bore a symbol, the chain, broken in half. "We call ourselves the children of the human," she said softly. "We travel across systems, freeing those still trapped, helping those who have no voice. Your story became our mission." Ethan stared at the symbol, eyes glistening. He never imagined his rebellion would grow into something greater than him. "You did this?" he asked, voice cracking. Mira smiled. "You taught us how." Word of the children of the humans spread faster than the council could control. They built shelters on war-torn planets, rescued enslaved species, and rebuilt orphan colonies under one flag, the symbol of the broken chain. And with every act of kindness, people remembered the man who started it all. Even the Galactic Council, once so cruel and untouchable, began to change. Laws were rewritten. The sale of orphans was banned across the core systems. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy began to value compassion over control. And though the Council never admitted it, the truth was known by all. A single human's heart had done what no army ever could. Years later, when Ethan grew old, Mira came to visit him again. His hair was gray, his face lined with time, but his spirit burned as bright as ever. He sat by the sea, staring at the sky he once dreamed of crossing. Mira sat beside him, silent for a while. Then she whispered, "You changed everything." He chuckled weakly. "Knowing we did," she smiled. "They still tell your story everywhere. Even children who have never seen a human know your name." Ethan's eyes softened. "If they remember kindness more than my face, then I've done enough." A soft wind blew over the water, carrying the sound of waves and memories. Ethan looked out at the horizon, his voice low. "Promise me something, Mira. Anything. Never stop freeing others. Even when it hurts. Even when it costs everything." She nodded, tears falling silently. "I promise." Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of the twin suns on his skin. For the first time since the war, he felt at peace. Not because he was free, but because they were. Moments later, his breathing slowed. Mira held his hand, whispering, "Rest now, Father. The galaxy will take it from here." Centuries later, statues of Ethan Cole stood on dozens of worlds, not carved in gold or marble, but in humble stone. Beneath each one were the same words etched in every language known to the stars. He broke the chains, not just of the orphans, but of the galaxy's heart. And under the endless sky of avarice, the sea still glowed softly, carrying his story across time. Somewhere in that light, the legend lived on, the human who refused to bow and taught the stars what mercy meant.